How lovely to see you, Giles. I haven't seen you for a long
Very
time.
good to see you too, and under such extraordinary circumstances.
Yes, I didn't think we would be talking to each other over Zoom like this. I didn't know what Zoom was a year ago, I don't think.
I've done very little of it, so you must forgive me if I interrupt, or you must put me right if I do the wrong.
And vice versa.
Okay.
Anyway, well, look, it's lovely to talk to you, and we're, as you know, we're just about to release a new CD, a second volume in our Magnificat series,
Yes.
coming out next month, and it was wonderful to include the first of your 4 Magnificat settings on that CD. I hope we'll record another one of your settings at some stage, but one at a time. Anyway, I'd love to know more about the sort of genesis of this, what has become a very iconic piece. I suppose, first of all, thinking back, it was about 1981, 82 when you...
I was about to say that it's pretty much 40 years ago.
Yeah, amazing.
And before I go any further, thank you for recording it, for putting it on this album. And when am I going to hear it?
Very soon. Yes, we must send you one straight after the. I think it's sort of arrived from the company, so we'll send you one straight away. Yeah.
And I imagine that John's will do it in their customary robust way.
well,
well,
you'll have to see. I hope you'll approve. I mean, we've tried.
I'm sure I will. I think it can be done in many ways, but I think John's are more suitable to the outdoor sort of sound that it needs.
Okay.
And I think, and I'm sure you'll have brought that to it.
Well,
as for the genesis, well, yes, it is nearly 40 years ago, and it came about because I was recording the songs of the Jola people in southern Senegal, what is called Casamance, in November, December, and January, 80 and 81, and I went out on a Elder Dempster cargo boat.
Wow.
from Tilbury.
Mm-hmm.
I had arranged to be looked after in a village in the Gambia, just near southern Senegal, and my host there, who's called Kajali Bojang, he obtained bicycles, and we bicycled all over southern Senegal, recording the music of the Jola people. And bear in mind, there were no roads in many of the places. And so he was generally ahead of me, and he was very strong. And I came to absolutely hate his back view. You know, when you're struggling on a bicycle and the person in front of you, he would plow through sand, dunes, anything, never come off his bike. And he was carrying most of the heavy recording equipment. And I would be wallowing in the sand and having to get off and get on again. And so it was great to have him as an assistant. I couldn't have done that without him.
Were you the first person to have recorded that music? I mean, sort of in.
No.
So
it has been recorded, but not. I did it in quite an intense way in that particular region.
Okay.
And I concentrated on a particular kind of choral music, which is called Bunya Sangabu, which is it is an old pre-Christian. They aren't allowed to do it anymore because it involves eating the brains of your grandfather. But it was a
fair enough.
And I think the heart and probably various other organs. But that was discontinued probably by the French, but they still have the songs. And but this particular song was not Bunya Sangabu is a funeral thing. It's a memorial. It's like a memorial service. Perhaps you should take this up at John's when you do memorial service for the Dons.
I didn't forget to eat their brains, but yes.
Well, that's what I didn't like to say. And but the one that I used, the song that I used was actually a work song. It's simply a song for working in the fields, and a very simple song, and it begins with the refrain that begins my piece. I just borrowed it, but then as soon as you get to the bottom of the sort of the gesture, it turns into a different song, and it's all about a character called Lulum, and he's died. No, I don't think he has died, but no, he hasn't. But it's a sort of gossip song about somebody called Lulum who never listens when people talk.
Okay.
He talks a lot and he never listens. That's the burden of it in the original. But I just thought the call opening it was so amazing, and
fantastic.
A lot of people like it just because it isn't dissonant. You know,
yeah.
One of the difficult things about being a composer, sometimes people like your music for absolutely annoying reasons.
I'm struck by the parallel between you going and recording and notating this music in the early 80s, and I suppose what Vaughan Williams was doing, 80 years earlier, and Kadai and Bartok and people, and it's sort of helps you create a new musical language in a way.
I think when you have an exhausted musical language, as was the case in Bartok's time. I mean, if you think of young Bartok, very early Bartok sounds like Strauss. And that kind of exhausted, overdone, overripe romantic music, something people had various ways of solving it, didn't they? And there was Schoenberg and 12 Notes, and then there was folk music. And in the case of Messiaen later in the 40s, there was birds. Birds and God.
Yeah.
And then in the case of Vaughan Williams, well, I think it's probably in the case of, don't you think it was because he saw, like many other people, that rural England was being wiped out, and so much was
preserve it. Yeah,
wanted to preserve it. I think it's a slightly different thing.
Okay.
In my case, it was, I think, yes, it was a genuine search for a form of expression which was natural is a silly word because nothing is natural, but which was more instinctive and on which I could build and still see if I could do sophisticated things with it.
Yeah. Well, it's extremely sophisticated music written out, kind of constructed out of very primitive materials. That's in a way, isn't it? When there are phrases with only 4, 5, 6 different pitches classes.
Yes, but you see the beginning opening after the original call, the opening call, there's a sort of, isn't it 7 against 8 against 5?
Oh yeah. So presumably all these polyrhythms are also influenced by music you heard in Africa, or was that from your studies with Messiaen, or what?
They are more to do with Messiaen, but also not so much Messiaen, because I was sort of formed already before then. More Pygmy music.
Okay.
The Pygmies use extraordinarily polyrhythmic, they create very complicated structures. They're so complex that you can't actually hear how they work. It's a bit like Renaissance polyphony. You really can't hear how it's being done. And yet individual lines are very simple, and it's brilliant.
Yeah. It's a sort of, I think putting the different parameters of composition into a different hierarchy. Because a lot of your piece is extremely simple harmonically, but much more complicated than what we're used to from a rhythmic point of view, whereas a lot of other music being written at the time would be the opposite. Yeah.
And that's true of a lot of Western music, that we have traditionally since, I suppose, Schütz, put a lot more emphasis on harmony and line than on rhythm, because of course the cadence stops the rhythm, doesn't it? If you have something if you have cadence, and so it's such a structural thing, a cadence actually completely breaks the rhythm. Yeah. So you could have it in Palestrina, you could have it in Victoria, but once you have strong cadence, and which is also, of course, also physical because you can dance to it, you're limited you're limited as to the complexity of the rhythm. And also there's another thing, and that is that I felt that we'd gone too far away from the physical, and that it was perfectly possible. It must be perfectly possible to create complex, or at least rewarding structures with simple building blocks, rather than quite a few pieces I've heard in the 70s, which were very unrewarding structures, made of very complicated building blocks.
Yeah.
You know,
Indeed.
and so I was trying to balance things a bit, really.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the fact that it was written for a church and
Cathedral.
A cathedral, indeed, yeah.
Yes.
And cathedral music has tended sometimes to be a few decades behind prevailing trends, and so it was particularly sort of innovative in that context.
That never occurred to me at the time, but
Really?
It is true, I suppose. Yes.
Because I often wonder whether there's a slight glint in your eye that enjoys being a bit subversive, especially in kind of hallowed ecclesiastical ground.
Yes, because I'm not a religious person, but I do feel that if there were a God, surely he deserves the best.
Of course.
and I don't think, and this is not in any way, it sounds critical, but there is an element of the what's it called, the English Anglican church tradition, which sort of glorifies mediocrity in harmony and rhythm.
Yeah,
it's very square, and you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. So I do feel that that when one creates music for religious, hate the word worship, but yes, celebration, it should be as adventurous and as exciting and as curious about the elements of music as any other kind of music, and not put on a hassock.
Yeah.
Not a hassock. No, a cassock.
A cassock, yes. Yeah, no, I agree entirely. What did Francis Greer say? Did he give you any kind of instructions or guidelines?
I don't remember him doing that. He was very open.
Yeah.
And which was great. Maybe we had a conversation. I think maybe we had a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I'm not a Church of England background. I didn't sing in a choir. Actually, I was brought up a Catholic. And I don't really want to do something which sounds like church music. I'd like to do something which is a piece of music.
Yeah.
But that's what I think I did say that in advance. He said, well, that's fine.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, it was such an exciting time at Christchurch then, so innovative. I was thinking, and he was lucky to. I don't know who the clergy were at Christchurch at that time, but I mean, he must have been lucky to have people who were willing to have new music in this way.
Yes. You mean the dean and
yeah, exactly. I mean, my dad was telling me that he did a broadcast about in the mid-70s in Exeter Cathedral with the not quite so avant-garde Howell's Gloucester service.
Yes.
And after this broadcast, the presenter hauled him into his house and said that he mustn't ever dream of doing something as modern as that again.
What was the offence? Do you remember?
Well, that it was this modern music and, didn't sound like Stanford. So...
I met Howells once. The Gloucester service isn't exactly cutting edge.
No,
it's a lovely piece. It's a lovely piece.
Yeah.
So there's room for all sorts, and I mean, because there's room for all sorts of things. That's why I think it's important to rethink things every time.
Yeah, it's great. It was interesting looking at your sketchbooks, which are now in the British Library, and seeing the sort of process that you underwent. I mean, I don't know how much you remember about it now, but seeing things like writing out the Latin text with some words underneath other ones, trying to make sure that particular vowel sounds.
Oh yes, that I do remember. You noticed that, did you?
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah,
to try and get what is it? Wait a minute. Well, things like
The yeah,
the particularly, and airs. The air I did more in Missa Tiburtina. I did the same thing, just to try and line them up.
yeah.
And sometimes to use them as a reason to start a voice at a particular place.
Yeah, yeah.
So start a voice at a particular place in counterpoint in order to get that vertical agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's quite fun, that. I enjoyed doing that.
And treating the vowel sounds like a form of instrumental color in a way, or something.
Yeah, completely. Yes. Yeah.
Sort of orchestrating the words. And another bit that fascinated me, we've just been talking about howls, but there's a sort of initial version where the piece ends on a very lush, low E major chord,
Really?
in the way that a howls piece might.
Yes.
And then actually, in the end, you end on a
yes, exactly.
solo.
My Magnificat, is there a lush E major chord in it?
Right at the end, in one of the versions, you know. So
I mean, I can hardly remember that, but I do remember that it was wrong to have any bass at that point.
Yeah.
Just take everything away.
And what about any thoughts about Mary's words? I mean, does it represent anything in?
Well, I'm going to say something which is probably extremely unhelpful here, and that is that I rarely set it in a very abstract way.
Mm.
I mean, of course, I'm aware of the meaning, but I really set it in an abstract way.
Yeah.
Without thinking too much about. Yes, dramatically, I was aware of a dramatic situation, but I wasn't trying to be expressive.
Not trying to do word painting in a tradition.
No, not at all. No. My word painting is with the vowels and the consonants.
Yeah. And that in itself,
you know, it's structural use of that syllables. It's syllabic.
Yeah. And that's liberating, I suppose. And I mean, a thing that fascinates me about this project of trying to record several different settings of the Evening Canticles is just it's fascinating how different composers' responses are, and treating it in an abstract way like that is wonderful, and it's a very legitimate liturgical religious thing to do, I think, in that
if you think about Summer Palestrina, I mean, I think it is quite, of course it is deeply expressive, but there is an abstract quality about it. Yeah.
And also if you think about some aspects of a very sort of high church or a Catholic mass, and maybe the tradition of a priest just saying some of the words of the Eucharistic prayer in Latin, kind of under his breath, and nobody's supposed to be able to hear. You just know it's happening. So intelligibility of the words isn't always the.
I would not ever say that I do not want the words of my first Magnificat to be heard.
Say that again.
I said, no, I'm never going to say to you, I don't want the words to be heard.
No.
But they are more syllables, aren't they? I mean, they are syllables, but that's if you like a means to an end. The words are pretty audible. It's only when they go into 8 parts. Then it doesn't matter. Then it really is abstract, I think.
But another thing, we ought to stop in a minute. But a choir is so often regarded as a sort of legato instrument. You, what did you say? You hate that?
I hate that because I think I hate it with all instruments actually, because it's the gaps between the notes which really matter.
Yeah.
That's what makes articulation.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And if I talk to you like this, can you understand what I'm saying? You can't.
Yeah, and it's allied to what you were saying earlier about most music up to that point being predominantly harmonic as it's sort of one of its primary things. But it strikes me that you're almost using a choir as, I don't know, a set of percussion instruments or something in a sense.
That's your way of putting it. It wouldn't be mine, because
you express it better then, please.
Well, since in Africa that's how they use voices.
Yeah,
they do use voices rhythmically.
Yeah.
And African music uses that. I mean, and of all the pieces I've ever written, that is probably the most directly influenced by African singing. And they really do use their voices rhythmically. We are not so good at that.
No.
Although jazz is better at it.
Yeah.
You know, but Western classical music is not very good at it. I mean, singers are dreadful at rhythm, almost as bad as string players.
We're certainly all more trained to try to make chords very well in tune than to think about complicated rhythms. Yeah.
I mean, I can't get Malu, my wife, to take her bow off the string at the end of a phrase. They join everything up.
Well, Giles, it's so lovely to talk to you about this, and I hope, gosh, I'm nervous now that you haven't heard the recording, and you might think it's.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
I hope you'll approve when you hear it. And
I will. Who's cutting your hair?
Who's cutting my hair? Yeah, no one at the moment. Yeah, sorry about that.
I thought.
Yeah. Well, it'll be nice and short and smart next time we see each other. Okay.
Great. Lovely to see you, Andrew.
Yeah, and you.
Thanks for recording it.
No, it's a great joy. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.